Bonjour Chiara, bonjour Félix,
Bonjour.
ça va bien? Okay. So there might be quite a few absentees, so I guess we'll just wait a couple minutes, at least until 1 to 5, okay? 1 to 5 minutes. Then we're going to be able to roll in for the class. So be mindful because there are quite a few absentees. We may be able to finish a little bit earlier ahead of schedule. So if that's okay with you, we might finish a little bit earlier. Okay?
Sounds great.
All right. Euh, hmm. Bonjour Alma.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, ça va?
Oui, bien.
Okay. All right. As I've told previously to the other person in the group, we're still going to be waiting for a couple minutes, at least until 5, okay? So that some people who are going to join may be able to join a little bit later, okay?
Perfect.
Can you hear us, Felix? Mm, not sure you can hear us, Felix, so I'll write you a message directly. Okay, great. So Felix can hear us. Okay. Okay, so I guess we'll be able to start right away. If some people join a little bit later, that's okay. Um, okay, so Alma, since it's your first class here today, I'm not sure that you are able to have access yet to the Google Drive.
Yeah, I don't think I do have access to the Google Drive.
Okay. Bonjour Bella. So I'll send you a link.
Bonjour,
Ça va Bella?
ça va bien, merci.
Super. Okay. So Alma, I'll send you directly a link for the Google Drive on the chat.
Amazing. Thank you.
Able to kind of see what we did well, for the few classes before. We have had like five. What? Yeah, we had 5 classes. So you'll have some catch up to do. I mean, we did kind of the basics, so it's nothing really. It doesn't really matter. And if you have time to either look at the recordings or the PowerPoint presentations there, that may be helpful to kind of get to know a little bit more about that. Okay.
Okay, yes, we'll do.
Alright, so on va commencer pour aujourd'hui, ok? Alors, Comme d'habitude, so as always, je partage mon écran. Okay, so. Alors, aujourd'hui, on commence une nouvelle unité, okay? So we're just kind of starting a new theme for today's class. So for the first unit, we talked about, well, how do you present yourself to, let's say, someone, or how to present someone, okay? Then we talked a little bit deeper about, well, how you would construct and be able to discuss with someone, okay? And today we're going to talk about, so the keywords here are vacances et voyage, okay? So can someone try to guess what's vacances et voyage?
Holidays and travels.
Yeah, so lequel est lequel? Est-ce que vacances...
Vacances et holiday.
Oui, très bien. Et voyage, travel. So it's something that is harder in French to understand, because we also talk about vacances sometimes when we are kind of doing a trip or traveling somewhere, okay? So today's class is called En Avant, okay? So it's basically, let's go, let's move forward, okay? So here are the objectives for today's. Donc ça, c'est les objectifs pour aujourd'hui. We're going to review, as always, we're going to start by talking about the previous lessons. So we're going to talk a little bit about the féminin et masculin, okay? The first group verbs with porter, aimer. We're going to talk about the vocabulary with les vêtements, and we'll finish by a little bit of phonetics, okay? And today, so as the theme of the class kind of expect you to talk about some stuff, so on va parler des transports, okay? So le mot transport is transparent, okay? C'est un mot transparent. So, well, you all talk English here, so I assume that you know what's les transports, okay? Then more about the grammaire. Does anyone know what's grammaire? It's also very transparent with English.
Grammar.
La grammaire, c'est grammar, okay? And same thing here, very transparent. Preposition is prepositions, okay? And we'll also continue to talk about the conjugaison, the conjugation with the first group verbs, okay? So again, this is something that is going to be very recurring, okay? So about the different groups, the different types of verbs in the French language, okay? Does that seem all clear to you? Do you have maybe a question about, well, Thursday's class or even before? Pas de questions? If you have any questions, you can simply ask a little bit later in the class. That's okay. So here is the table of contents for today's class. So we're going to talk a little bit at the start to kind of get the class going. Again, we're going to do a little bit of révision, some reviewing, as I've told you previously. So we're going to start with the reviewing, then les transports, then talk about some conjugation with the verbs, okay? And then we're going to do kind of a project, if you will. And we're simply going to talk a little bit deeper and kind of reuse everything that we've learned so far, okay? Ok, alors on commence. As always, comment ça va, Félix? Est-ce que tu nous entends, Félix? So if you're trying to talk, your microphone might be muted, okay? So if you can correct that, that would be pretty useful for the later part of the class, okay? Anyway, Bella, comment ça va?
Très bien, merci.
Très bien, super. Est-ce que tu peux demander à quelqu'un d'autre dans la classe?
D'accord. Sierra, comment ça va?
Ça va très bien, merci. Ça va, Alma?
Oui, très bien, merci.
Okay, super. So Felix is not going to be able to talk since is in a office space, okay? So we're going to move on with the next part here. So we have another questions. This might be a little bit transparent, okay? But the construction of the sentence will be a bit hard, okay? So the question is here. La question c'est tu as fait quoi ce week-end? Est-ce que c'est compréhensible? Do everyone kind of understand what that means? Tu as fait quoi ce week-end? Or maybe does someone want to or need some kind of explanation about the question?
Is it? Well, I'm not sure if it's what are you doing this weekend or what did you do this weekend?
So try to give a guess. Essaye de deviner l'un des deux.
I'm going with last weekend. So what did you do? I think it's what have you done this
Yeah.
weekend?
Oui, très bien. Merci Alma. C'est effectivement what have you done? So here you have kind of the answer here with the use of the what we call in French the passé composé. Okay. So we use the passé composé to talk about past actions. For example, well, what have you done for the weekend? Typically in English, we would use like either the past perfect or the preterite, okay? But so the conjugation and tenses in French are very different. So for example, you have the preterite, which is kind of the basic tense for past actions. In French, I think that we would have like maybe 3 tenses that are equivalent to the preterite. Okay. So here we have a question. So, tu as fait quoi ce week-end? So if you're able to make a sentence about what you've done this weekend, this is great. Otherwise, you can use des mots-clés. Qu'est-ce que c'est des mots-clés? C'est quoi des mots-clés? Does anybody know what that expression means here? Des mots-clés.
Does it mean like the main words? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
keywords?
Oui, c'est ça. C'est so basically it's an expression that is the same thing as in, well, English, where you would say keywords, okay? So the clé is key, okay? So if you're able to make a whole sentence, that's great. If you can't, you can just use keywords, so des mots-clés. Or you can even ask me for some vocabulary, okay? So I'll start again with Bella. Bella, tu as fait quoi ce week-end?
Je suis allée au restaurant et je fais la boxe.
Très
Et
bien.
Qu'est-ce
Ok.
qu'il y a encore? Je fais le ménage.
Tu as fait du ménage, super. Ok. Bah, tu peux demander à, disons, Alma.
D'accord. Bonjour Alma, qu'est-ce que tu as fait ce week-end?
Très bien,
Tu
merci.
as fait quoi ce week-end?
C'était mon anniversaire.
Ah, bon
Euh,
anniversaire.
Merci. Alors, I went, je ne sais pas. Je vais pour le poisson avec mes amis.
Ok. Très bien. Merci, Alma. Est-ce que tu peux demander à Chiara, s'il te plaît?
Euh, Clara, tu as fait quoi ce week-end?
Yoga et télévision.
Could you try to repeat that?
Yoga et
Oh, ok.
télévision.
Révision?
Yeah.
Ok, très bien. Tu as révisé des cours? So, do you understand the word cours?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Cours or lessons or classes?
Yeah, classes.
Ok, good. Ok. Donc, tu as révisé et tu as fait du yoga. Ok. Alors, moi, je suis allé à Paris ce week-end, ok? Et je suis allé en concert, ok? So, concert, I'll write in the chat, is a good example of the phonetics in French, okay? So, for example, here you have the word that I'm typing in the chat, concert. So it's basically written the same way as in English. I don't know if it's a French word at the start or an English word. Either way, in English you would pronounce every letters, so you would pronounce it like concert. In French it's more specific, so you would say concert. Okay. So here you cannot hear the T. It's basically silent, or you can call it mute. Okay. Très bien, merci à toutes. Du coup, on avance. On va parler des révisions, ok? Donc, désolé, Chiara. Sorry, Chiara. We'll going to do some révision still, okay? So, I'm not sure, Alma, since you weren't there for the past classes. So do you know the basic rules of conjugation with like the different types of groups in French?
Oui.
Oui. Alors, so I assume that this is pretty hard for you, or well, it's hard for pretty much anyone who is trying to learn French. So for now, we're strictly going to talk about the first group, as it is the the most general, kind of the general rule about the different types of verbs in French. But we're going to talk a little bit deeper here, okay? Donc, on a le verbe jouer. Il y a la traduction à côté. I play, je joue. Alma, est-ce que tu peux me dire, ou est-ce que tu pourrais essayer de me dire, so how would we know how to conjugate, let's say, for example, here, a first group verb?
As in like what's the rules?
Yeah, oui.
So like take off the ER and for I add E, for you add ES, he, she, it, E, we, ONS,
Mhm.
and then you, EZ, and they, ENT.
Yeah, so that's correct. So the important part here, la partie vraiment très importante, is that you have to identify the root of a verb. So for example, if we take the example table that is filled out here is we have to separate into two parts. We have the ER, okay, so that's kind of the suffix, the things that you would, and like it's kind of the added part of a verb. So if you want like a kind of a reminder of, or a method to remind yourself, so what are the first type group, okay? So they are called the ER verbs, les verbes en ER, okay? So here we know that we have to kind of eliminate the ER part. So we have the root with joue, and then it's very easy. You just have to separate all those parts. And then what you end up with is the endings of every verb and the pattern that you have to follow. So for each and every verb, okay? Donc on va partir sur ensuite porter, okay? So we talked about the verb porter. Chiara, est-ce que tu peux me rappeler c'est quoi le verbe porter? So could you try to remind me what the verb porter means?
Sorry,
Mhm.
to carry?
So it's there's a way it would be like meaning carry if it was like, for example, a chair. But it's a verb with two meanings if you translate it. So it's either carry, and we talked about it, for example, with clothes. So it wasn't carrying, it was wearing, okay? So in that case, because last time we talked about, well, clothes, we would probably use the meaning as in wearing, okay? So it's, Felix, it's carry, but here the meaning is more like wearing, okay? Donc, Chiara, so we're going to stay with you, okay? So could you try to identify the root of the verb here and try maybe to conjugate the verb porter?
So the first one being je porte. So
Je porte.
P-O-R-T, and then do you keep it at the E, or would it include the R?
So basically, the root, you would just cut it, the word at the T, okay?
Yep.
Donc, tu as dit pour le premier, c'était je porte, ok? Très bien. Est-ce que tu l'écrirais comment? So, how would you spell it? The whole verb.
P-O-R-T and then E.
Ok, so P-O-R-T-E, très bien. P-O-R-T, porte, très bien. Ensuite,
And then two ports, so P-O-R-T and then E-S.
très bien. P-O-R-T-E-S, ok.
And then L port, so P-O-R-T-E again.
Porte encore, même chose, ok.
And then nous portons, so P-O-R-T-O-N-S.
Portons, ok, très bien.
And then vous portez, P-O-R-T-E-Z.
About the pronunciation, it's close. However, the Z isn't pronounced. On prononce pas le Z. So, to kind of help you with the pronunciation, you would pronounce it like in those brackets like this, okay?
Okay, yeah. Oui.
So it's not portes, it's like porter, okay?
Oui.
Porter. Et ensuite, le dernier.
And then ils and elles porten.
so it's the same pronunciation as the first and the third one. So it
Okay.
is porte. Yeah. So the spelling is different. There are many more letters. However, it's the same pronunciation for the first, the third, and the last. About the pronouns here, they're pronounced the same way as in here, even though, well, there's an S. So how could you possibly know if, like, if you hear some French and you hear il ou elle, so how would you know if it's plural or singular? Well, there's no clear method as to know how or what kind of person is it. It's just kind of the context that matters. And in that case, well, you would hear it either with the conjugation. So it's just a matter of context. Okay. Des questions pour l'instant? Any questions about first verb groups? Pas de questions? Ok. Très bien. No question, Felix? Okay, great. If you have any question, Felix, you can just write them in the chat and I'll try to answer them whenever I see your message. Okay, so the second part of our reviewing, nos révisions, okay? On va parler des vêtements, okay? What was important, or what we talked about that was very important and very crucial last time was the relation between nouns and adjectives in French. So for example, here, the colors are adjectives, okay? So what was very important is to know if adjectives are kind of agreeing with the nouns. So can anyone try to sort of remind me of the rule about nouns and adjectives and, well, genders and numbers?
Does each noun have a gender, so female or masculine, and then dependent on the gender of the noun, you change the ending of the adjective, and then dependent whether it's singular or plural, the noun, you add an S onto the adjective.
Très bien. Super, Alma, merci beaucoup. That's the basic rule, yeah. So as we all know, every noun in French has a gender or a number. So if we take a closer look, for example, for this one, noir. So it's written this way with an E, which is kind of the mark of the feminine gender in English or in French. So how do we know that it's possibly like a feminine adjective? Is because here the noun is feminine. So the clothes here is une jupe, okay? So basically we would say une jupe noire. So for example, here the noun is feminine, so the adjective has to also be feminine. In most cases, or in pretty much every cases, the feminine is marked with an E at the end. If it was plural, it would have been an S, okay? But in certain cases, as in here, so for example, for the adjectives which ends with an E, well, it stays the same, okay? You wouldn't add another E at the end, for example, of jaune, because it would kind of mess up the pronunciation and the spelling. So jaune is written this way, masculine or feminine. Another example of something that really doesn't move, either if it's masculine or feminine, is the color marron. Okay, marron is both masculine and feminine. Do you have any idea of another case for maybe another color which has the same situation as jaune, where you wouldn't add anything? So for example, if it's singular, we have two more colors here on that image.
Rouge.
Rouge, très bien, Chiara. Rouge, par exemple. Alors pourquoi rouge? Why rouge? Because it also ends with an E, the mark of the feminine. So rouge, and there's another one. So the last one, maybe someone can try to give a guess.
Is it rose?
Rose, oui, très bien. Rose, same thing. It ends with an E, the mark of the feminine. And if it's masculine, it would be written this way as well if it was feminine. Okay. So something very important about the adjectives and the nouns in French is also their placements in a sentence. So for example, if we had a, let's say, a typical placement in a sentence, for example, in English, for example, we'll take the first clothes here, okay? So we would say a black t-shirt, okay? Or just black t-shirt. The adjectives is before the noun, okay? Would that be the same case in French?
No.
No, it's not the same thing. So what would you say, Chiara? Qu'est-ce que tu dirais, toi?
So I only know, like, for example, black jumper. So you would go pull noir.
Un pull noir, très bien, oui. So basically the adjective would be following the noun. So that's something that we have, which is different. And I told on Thursday, so last week, that it was also the same thing for adverbs, for example, where adverbs are also after, which is different because adverbs kind of are before the words that they are qualifying and describing. So that's something that is important to keep in mind, okay? So we're going to go through all of those quickly, okay? So what's the first one in French here? So how would you call that in French? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Felix, if you have any guesses, you can write them in the chat if you want to, okay? So la couleur est noire, okay? Do you have maybe the name of the vêtement here? So what is it? Donc la couleur est noire et le vêtement c'est quoi? Est-ce que c'est une chemise, un sweat? Est-ce que c'est un pantalon? Okay, so basically the question, Felix, here is what type or what cloth is it? Is it a, well, a shirt? Is it or is it pants? Is it shoes or whatever? So what would you say in French? If anyone has a guess on what that cloth, what that item is called, you can just take the, well, open your microphone and say the answer. Any guess? Ok, donc ça, c'est un t-shirt, ok? Un t-shirt. So, on dit un t-shirt noir, ok? So the spelling here would be masculine, noir, okay? Next up is that at the right, okay, so here, so we saw last time how we were pronouncing certain English words in French, okay? So here is a sweatshirt, okay? Or a hoodie, depending on what you say, okay? In French, it's very common to call them like this, but we wouldn't pronounce it the English way with sweat. We would say sweet, okay? Ça c'est un pull, okay? And we talked about well, if you can call that a rule, with like pants, shorts, and that's about it. For example, the nouns in English are plural. Pants, shorts are plural. However, in French, it is singular. So you wouldn't say des pantalons. Here you would say un pantalon. Okay? So be mindful of that because, well, most of the times, or in English, it is plural. However, in French, it's singular. Okay? So we'll try to do kind of an exercise, okay? Avec la question ici, tu portes quoi aujourd'hui? So to help yourself, there's the conjugation table here with the verb porter. Tu portes quoi aujourd'hui, Bella?
Je porte une robe rouge.
Une robe rouge, super. Merci, Bella. Est-ce que tu peux demander à Alma ou Chiara?
Ok. Alma, qu'est-ce que vous portez aujourd'hui?
Très bien.
Aujourd'hui, je porte un pantalon noir et une chemise blanche.
Une chemise blanche, très bien. Be mindful that pantalon is masculine, so you would say un pantalon.
Un pantalon. Oui,
Très bien.
merci.
Super. Tu peux demander à Chiara?
Ah oui, Chiara, qu'est-ce que porte quoi aujourd'hui?
Ok, très bien.
Pantalon noir et peau noire.
Et un pull noir, très bien. Super. Okay. So for example, we saw here with the items and clothes, or even words in general that were borrowed from English and were translated into French. So for example, with pullover and sweatshirt, be mindful that sometimes people will not understand you because they have their own pronunciation. For example, brownie, a brownie. Okay, so if you go in a bakery in France and you ask for a brownie, people may not be able to understand you because in French we call them brownie. Okay, so again, French people aren't really talented with languages in general and especially English. Okay, and lastly, we talked about two different sounds, okay? Can anyone remind me of what they were sounding like? So how would you pronounce the first letter, the first capital letter here? Comment est-ce que ça se prononce? Anyone willing to give it a go, maybe? Alma, peut-être?
I can get
Ok,
eh.
ok, très bien. Et le deuxième?
Is it
It's not E. E is, for example, for the plain letter, if you would, like this E.
Yeah. Je ne sais pas.
Je ne sais pas. Okay, so the first one was great. Okay, it's E. So you kind of have that visual help with the accent. So it's rising. You would say eh. You would say e. Okay. For the other one, you have that visual help that it is kind of going down. So you would say eh. Okay. So there's a difference with e, which is rising, and eh, that is kind of going down. Okay. So for example, there are many ways you could encounter the sound e and e. Okay. So last time we looked at some um, different patterns in which you would be able to encounter e and e. No problem, Kara. Okay. So here is the first table with e. Okay. What we are going to do is we are going to think about maybe certain words that would be pronounced e. Does anyone want to maybe give a word that is pronounced e? So it's a couple words that we saw today. We're using that sound.
Earlier, did we have clé for key?
Clé, clé, très bien. Mot-clé. So basically, with the word clé, there's the E accent, okay? So, oh yeah, how would you call that letter in French, Alma?
Not just E.
C'est pas juste E, oui. C'est E accent aigu, okay?
Oh, accent to the la.
Mhm. E accent aigu, okay? So, if you would say like it's like the E accent high, if you would. Okay, so it's kind of more high, and the other one would be E accent grave, okay? So the E accent low, if you will. So it's a good answer. So for example, we have this letter that would pronounce the E. If we go back into what we saw today, how would you pronounce that word, Bella? Comment est-ce que tu prononcerais ce mot ici, là, que je viens de souligner? Le verbe à l'infinitif.
Porter.
Porter, très bien. Donc, on entend, porter, c'est aussi le ER est prononcé E. So the ER together are pronounced E. And if we stay again with the verb porter, we have here, so Bella, maybe again, how would you pronounce it?
You mean the conjugation?
Yeah, this one.
Je porte. Je porte.
Oh, no, starting from vous.
À vous. Vous portez.
Vous portez, très bien. Super, merci Bella. So it's the same thing again, okay? So we have kind of these three types that are very frequent in French, okay? Which would be pronounced E, okay? So, donc on a le accent aigu, le ER et EZ ensemble, qui font ce son. Okay? But what about the other one with the E accent grave? Le E accent grave. Donc, on reprend la même logique. We kind of do the same logic. So here we have the E accent grave. Okay? What other letters would be pronounced eh? Any idea, maybe?
Grève,
Je
la
t'écoute.
grève.
Grève, okay. So that's an example with the E accent grave, grève. So something that French people are really talented with. Okay. We also have another letter, another accent. Okay. So this accent is called accent circonflexe. And it is pronounced the same way as this one. It's eh. Okay. And we also have here eh written this way. So those three kind of sounds are pronounced the same way. I'm going to take examples with them, okay? So for the first one or the second one, we have fenêtre, okay? So c'est quoi fenêtre? Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire fenêtre? What is the word here?
Window.
Window, okay. And the second one, yeah. Okay. So what's that word? Balai?
Broom.
Broom, yeah, totally. Okay. Merci beaucoup, Bella. Donc, very important is the way those little sounds are pronounced. This can be really tricky sometimes, okay? Because, well, the pronunciation differs with certain people. However, you have to be mindful about how you would pronounce those group of letters together, okay? So here is E and here is E. Do you think for, well, Alma and Bella, do you think you would be able to kind of hear the difference between I and E in, well, in the context of conversations, for example?
Maybe, I don't know.
Pas sûr, ok, peut-être. Alma, peut-être?
Yeah, maybe. Prob's unlikely.
Maybe if like the speaker is speaking a little bit slower, okay?
Yeah, very slowly.
However, some words are really important to be pronounced certain ways. However, like for this example here with a beginner's class, this doesn't matter much, okay? So what's important, again, is that you know how to read and that you have to kind of pronounce it a different way. You have to hear the accent, okay? So either way, it's E or eh. Okay? Any questions for the reviewing about those two accents?
The accent going up, how do you spell its name?
What did you say?
The accent going up,
Oui.
it's like agush. How do you spell
Okay.
that?
Accent aigu. Alors, je te l'écris dans le chat. I'm writing that in the chat. Aigu.
Aigu. Ah oui.
And the other one is accent grave. Okay.
Oui.
Donc, tu vois les différences. Okay.
Oui, oui. Merci.
De rien. Okay. Well, we're going to move on. Okay. So, starting for today's, well, important vocabulary. So we're talking about voyages et vacances. On parle des voyages et des vacances. Donc, ce qui est très important ici, c'est les transports, ok? Alors, I don't think I need to specifically address what's les transports. You're all English speakers, so you know what's les transports. It's, well, means of transportations, okay? So we have a couple of words here: vélo, avion, train, bus, trottinette, et voiture. So what's like the little word before the names of the means of transportation here? So do you know what's, well, the equivalent maybe in English?
It's not, is it the article?
So
No.
it's, so we have like I'm not sure how you would pronounce it in English, or how you would say it. In French, we call them like the well, the articles undefined. Yeah. Ici, on a undefined. Okay, thank you. So it's and un. Okay. Donc on a un ou une. Okay. So that's for the undefined articles. But what we're looking for here is les articles définis. Okay. So what's the article défini? Qu'est-ce que c'est? C'est quoi?
C'est le and la.
Oui. Et il en manque un? Le, la et
Les.
Très bien. Les. Okay, so that's something that you could like add to that table, is that sometimes es together is pronounced e. Okay, just something to keep in mind. Okay. Okay. Donc on a le, la, les. This is called the article défini in French. Okay. So the, well, the equivalent in English is much more simple. It's the. It's the, either if it's, well, nouns aren't gendered in English, so it's if it's either singular or plural. Here we have a couple of, so vocabulary here: voiture, train, avion. You have, well, an idea of their gender with their articles. Donc, bah, Alma, c'est quoi l'article défini pour voiture?
What article? Oh, what is the definite article for each of the transports? Pour voiture, la voiture.
La voiture, très bien. Pourquoi là?
Parce que voiture est féminine.
Féminin, très bien. Ok.
Le train.
Le train, très bien. C'est masculin.
L'avion with L accent.
Très bien. Okay, so it's not really an accent. We call it like the apostrophe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Do you call it in English maybe hyphen or something like that?
Apostrophe. Same thing.
Okay, apostrophe. Okay,
Yeah.
so the apostrophe, l'avion. And why would you have an apostrophe?
Because it would be le, but it's two vowels followed by each other, which is hard to pronounce. So it's the apostrophe instead.
Très bien, super, ouais, effectivement. Donc, if we have two vowel sounds following, we would try to kind of facilitate the pronunciation. In that case, we use the apostrophe, and it can either be feminine or masculine. So in that case, avion is masculine. So it's
yeah.
a bit harder to know what the gender is for that specific word, since we don't have, for example, le, which is a good indication of if it's masculine or feminine. But we know that avion is masculine, so okay. Après l'avion, Bella, peut-être? C'est quoi? Est-ce qu'on dit la bus?
Le bus,
Le bus, ok, très bien. Ensuite,
le vélo,
le vélo, ok. Et la dernière?
la trottinette.
La trottinette, ok, très bien. Something important to keep in mind, same thing in English, is if it's plural, we would add an S. However, we have an example here with le bus. It already has an S. What do you do in this situation to make it plural? Any idea, maybe? Une idée peut-être?
To change the article, but the word stays the same.
Oui, très bien, super. If it's plural, we would say les bus. It wouldn't change the spelling of the root of the word. Okay. Ok, très bien, super, merci. Alors, maintenant qu'on a un peu le vocabulaire des transports à l'esprit, so now that we have the vocabulary of the transport in mind, we're going to take a little look at the conjugation. So here we have two verbs. So one that we saw before, the verb faire, okay? And the other, the verb prendre. So there's a basic question here. Faire ou prendre? Does anyone or does everybody understand the little question? Faire ou prendre?
Is it asking you which verb you use for each type of transport?
Okay, très bien, super Alma. I did ask you, do you live in Paris, Alma?
We.
Oui, donc tu reconnais les deux. So you recognize the two images, I assume.
Ouais.
Okay, donc so because you're in Paris, for example, we'll take the first one, or no, the second one, with le bus, okay? So what verb would you use here?
Je pense prendre, mais je ne sais pas.
Je prends. So you said in the beginning, je prends, okay?
Oui.
Très bien, okay, so je prends le bus.
Oui.
In English, you would say I take the bus, or I am taking the bus, depending on the tenses. So here it's the same thing. So because in English we say I take, we know that the verb prendre is take. Okay. So something now that we have to know in order to talk a little bit more about the conjugation is to learn the rules of, well, here, know the rules of this group. So does anybody know what group does prendre belong to?
Is the ending re?
Well, there's, you would say, yeah. So there's the RE, and what number of group would it be? Is it the first, the second, the third group?
Oh, I don't think I've seen your groups.
Okay, so this is the third group, le troisième groupe. Something to keep in mind, we don't have any irregular verbs in French, or irregular verbs as the same way you would view it in the English language. However, le troisième groupe is the closest thing we have to the irregular verbs. Why do I say that? Because, well, verbs in the third group don't follow the same pattern that we would use to conjugate verbs, for example, with the first group. So with the ER, the first group, we saw that we had to cut the root or the verb into to identify the root. However, here we have irregular verbs. So for example, the verb that is, that is the verb that is the most used ever in French, être. So we know that être is a third group because it has the E. Okay, but firstly, we're going to talk about the conjugation of prendre. Okay, so Alma, you said je prends, okay? So how would you spell that?
P-R-E-N-D-S.
Yep. So we have an S here, which is different from the first group, which didn't have an S.
Ouais.
Ensuite, pour tu, on a quoi?
Is it the same as above?
Is it? It's the same. Je prends.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that the S is often the mark of the second person of the singular. Okay.
Yeah.
Et pour le troisième, il, elle.
Prend. P-R-E-N-D. No S.
No S. Okay. And in that case, we have another rule. The absence of the S is a mark of the singular third person. Okay. And what do we have after?
O-N-S.
Okay, so how would you spell that? Or pronounce the word in general?
From don. I know.
Yeah,
Don.
so it's a good logic in a way. So because we kind of identified the root here. However, as I've told you, they are called like the irregular verbs of French. So here it's
No.
prenons.
Ouais.
So we kind of there's a lack or an absence of the D here. And it's the same thing here. Vous prenez, il, elle prennent. Okay? Or, whoop, I misspelled it. It's prennent. Okay? So here you can see why we call that group the irregular verbs of French. Because there's the pattern that is followed, and starting from the plural, we have something that is very different. Okay. All right. When we talk about the most important verb of the French language, how would you conjugate that verb? The verb être.
Je suis. Tu es. Il, elle, on est. Nous sommes.
Très bien.
Vous étiez.
Vous
Et-
êtes. Okay.
Êtes. Ils, elles, étons.
Ooh.
Et-
Sont.
Elles
Sont.
sont. Ah oui.
Okay. So you can hear in what Alma said that, well, the expression that we use, like the third group is the irregular group, because it's so different. We have a root, or in certain ways, if we were to kind of use the same tactics as before with the first group, but it doesn't matter because here we have je suis, tu es, il, elle est, nous sommes. So it's very irregular. So totally different from, well, the pattern that we used before. Okay. And so for the other kind of image, so here we can see des vélos. On peut voir des vélos. Chiara, are you with us or aren't you? So you're back, okay? Alors, so would we use faire ou prendre? So what verb would you use?
Faire.
Faire, okay. So what would you say for that sentence? Je.
Je fais les vélos.
Okay, c'est je fais. A good start. However, next up we would say du. Okay, so we wouldn't use a definite article. Okay, so un article défini. We would use du. And this should remind you something, for example, when we talked about hobbies, sports, etc. Because, for example, when we talked about activities, we said that, for example, we would use du, de la, et des. For example, well, if I take the example of hiking or climbing, we said je fais de l'escalade, je fais de la randonnée. So that little preposition here, du, is often linked with activities in general. In that case, vélo is an activity in itself, okay? So more specifically about the conjugation. So what would be the conjugation of the verb faire? Does anybody would like to give it a go? Maybe Bella or even Kara or Felix if you want to write in the chat. What is the conjugation of the verb faire? C'est quoi?
Je fais.
Je fais, ok. Comment est-ce que tu l'écrirais?
F-R. Non, F-A-I-S.
F-A-I-S, très bien.
Tu fais.
Tu fais.
Il fait. Avec
Okay.
un T.
Avec un T. Okay, so we can see that it's the same pattern as before with the verb prendre, okay? And then
Nous faisons.
nous faisons, okay, très bien.
Vous faisiez.
So it would be, vous faisiez, it would be like the logical things to say. However, it is
Oh, vous faites.
fait, okay? And then,
You fais.
so again, it would be correct. However,
Ils font.
ils font, yeah. So you can see that the third group, the last group, is kind of the harder group because it is very irregular. So here, same thing with prendre, we have a logical pattern. So the S here, the S, the T. Then we have some, well, you would say that it would be confirming for the pattern. But however, for the two last persons, it is very different. Okay. Do you have any questions for now regarding the third group? Or does it seem clear to you in some ways? No questions? Okay. we'll be moving on. I don't think, well, we don't have time for a pause, so we'll just skip it, okay? Like just before we talked about the conjugations in that case of the third group. Here it's going to be, well, you will see. We'll learn about the conjugation of the verb aller, okay? Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? C'est quoi le verbe aller? Any idea, maybe? Une idée, quelqu'un? Alma, Bella, Chiara, ou Félix dans le chat?
You
To
ask.
go.
So, one at a time, please. Une à la fois. Bella, peut-être? C'est Bella?
To go.
It's to go, yeah. So that was what you were saying, Alma?
I was gonna ask if you were asking what it meant, and then
That was the question. So Bella answered it. So it's the verb to go. Okay, très bien. Alors, so what group would be the verb aller in? So would it be the first group, the second group, or the third group? Chiara, do you have an idea?
No, I don't, sorry.
Okay. So we'll just look at firstly the verb jouer. We know that the verb jouer is the first group, okay? So what hint would it give you about the verb aller, Chiara? Does it give you a hint about the, well, the verb or the group that it belongs in?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Well, you can try. If it's like a, well, you have 33% chances that it's right. So is it the first, second, or the third group?
The second.
No, it's not the second. It's, well, we talked about how you would recognize a first type of group, okay? So it is with the ER, aller, as the ER here. So we know it's a verb of the first group. However, things are not as simple as they seem. Maybe Alma and Bella, you have the answer. But what is the conjugation of the verb aller?
Is it je vais, tu vas, on va, nous allons, vous allez? Is it il, elle, al? I don't think it allons.
It's close.
My last one.
So we'll go for that again. So great, très bien, super Alma. Alors, je vais, tu vas, okay. Then il, elle va. Nous allons, okay. Then you said vous allez. And the last one was kind of tricky. It's ils, elles vont. Okay.
Wait.
So it kind of, it wasn't meant to ruin your perception of the first group, okay? However, aller, even though it's a member of the first group, because it ends with er, it is the only irregular verb of the first group. So you can see that it doesn't follow the, well, the so-called method in order to know how to conjugate a first group.
Does every other ER verb, like there's not another single one that doesn't follow the pattern?
That's a good question. So in my mind, I think that aller is one of the only verbs that is like irregular.
Okay, yeah.
That is something that I should check. But I think that there are so few verbs that are irregular in the first group. So I would say that is one of the only ones. It's
Okay.
so few. Um, so here you can see that you can't follow, well, the usual method in order to conjugate a verb, okay? So now that we have the conjugation of the verb aller, okay? We're going to see how we would use them or use the verb aller in the context of a sentence. For example, with the preposition à la, au, et how would you pronounce that one? That preposition, the last one? Chiara, do you want to give it a try? The last one that I've just circled around.
Oh.
Oh, okay, très bien. Oh, yeah. Oh. So it's basically pronounced the same way as here. Oh. We talked about it. The X is also a mark of the plural. So just the same way as the S. And like the S, the mark of the plural is always mute. So you wouldn't hear it, okay? So according to you, how do we know which preposition to use? Anybody wanted to give it a try? Maybe Felix in the chat? Bella, so you don't have any idea, Felix? Okay. Bella, do you have an idea? Peut-être?
Well, O is for masculine, LR is for feminine, and
Très
O
bien.
is for plural.
C'est pour le pluriel, très bien. So in order to know what preposition we should use, we have to identify the gender and the number of the noun, okay? So here we have, well, we have 5 sentences, okay? We have to identify their gender and their number, okay? So this is going to be very simple, or maybe not. Bella, café, est-ce que c'est masculin, féminin ou pluriel? Ici, le premier, là.
C'est masculin, donc c'est O.
C'est masculin et c'est singulier, ok? Donc c'est O. Yeah, this one. C'est singulier. Pour le deuxième, Alma, est-ce que ce serait singulier, pluriel, féminin, masculin? Pour restaurant,
Is it masculine?
c'est masculin, oui.
Okay.
Et est-ce que
So,
c'est au, oui.
oh, oui.
Au singulier, toujours, okay? So, no S's at the end, so it's singulier.
Oui.
Chiara, pour ce mot-là, les invalides. So I think that you're in Paris too, Chiara, so I guess you know what's the invalide, les invalides, okay?
Plural.
It's plural, and as we know, the plural is like kind of the neutral gender in French. However, it would be spelled just like the masculine. Okay, so tu vas aux invalides. Do you know what's the invalide, Kiara? I think so, since you live in Paris.
Like museum, monument kind of thing.
So it's kind of a region, or not really a region, but a place in Paris, yeah. So there are multiple like ministers, etc. Felix, you've answered the next one, okay? Il va à l'université, ok, très bien. Et alors, Félix, très bien. Tu utilises l'apostrophe, so you use the apostrophe, okay? And you know also that it is feminine. Okay, good. Again, if we have two vowel sounds, that wouldn't be possible. So what we do is use the apostrophe to kind of facilitate the pronunciation. And the last one, Bella, again, elle va, la banque, is it masculine, feminine?
À la banque.
À la banque, oui, c'est féminin. Ok, à la banque. Ok, très bien. I've just put like a little reminder or something to know, okay? Donc, à mémoriser. This is something that we are going to talk about for the final activity that is coming just right up, okay? So it is kind of similar in English with the expression of the futur proche, okay? So the futur proche or close future. Do you call that the close future in English? I'm not sure. Like when so it's very, so the futur proche is, for example, when we, so I think that, for example, in English it would be with the I'm going to, etc. So
I think we're a lot less restrictive on the amount of time we use for each of the futures. I think they're a lot more interchangeable than they are in French.
okay, yeah, so for example, it would be, the most important thing is the expression, for example, with like hints of time, like for example with tomorrow or yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, tomorrow or later, okay?
Yeah.
So this is the same thing in French. What we are saying here with the futur proche, or I called it close future, so it is kind of more understandable, is that with the verb aller, we can express something in the future. We call it the futur proche because it's like for events, for example, that are going to be happening in the week or that are set in time. Okay. So in order to kind of make a sentence with the futur proche, we have to conjugate a sentence. So at the present tense, for example, je vais, okay? So that's something we saw with the verb aller. However, after, so the action of the sentence has to be an infinitive verb, okay? So here we have the verb aller, which is infinitive, okay? And for the other sentence, we have manger, which is also infinitive. Does everybody know what's the meaning of manger?
To eat.
To eat, yeah. Okay. So here, those two sentences, even though they're not conjugated at the future tense, they're both expressing an action that is present in the future. Okay? So what we are going to do now that we know that, okay, is that we are going to try, so for our final activity, we're going to skip that, okay? So for our final activity, we are going to talk about, well, your plans for the weekend, or in French, you would say, vos projets pour ce weekend, okay? So if we are going to be using the futur proche. So what is going to be very important is to have like kind of a indicator of time. Here we have ce weekend, okay, so this weekend. And what is very important after is the correct tense with the verb aller at the present tense, and then the infinitive verbs of actions, okay? Does anybody understand the futur proche? Or how you would, well, make a sentence using the futur proche? Give me a thumbs up or something, an affirmation, so everybody kind of understand.
Donc, ça-
Tu comprends, Alma?
Oui.
Oui, ok, super.
je prends.
Bah tiens, on va commencer avec toi, Alma. So you can start. Ok. C'est quoi tes projets pour ce week-end?
Ce week-end, je vais faire du shopping.
Ok, très bien, faire du shopping.
Oui.
Où est-ce que tu vas faire du shopping?
Where?
Mhm.
Je ne sais pas.
Ok, très bien. Ok, super. Alors, for Felix, you can write your sentence in the chat and I'll try to correct it. Okay. Bella, tu vas faire quoi ce week-end?
Je vais aller au restaurant.
Je vais aller au restaurant. Très bien. Ok, super. C'est quoi comme restaurant? C'est un restaurant italien? Je sais pas.
Ouais, c'est un restaurant français.
Français. Ok, super. So I think that you're in Paris too, Bella.
Yes.
Yeah. So something that is very Parisian is the what we call les bouchons. Okay.
Ok.
So it's like the typical Parisian. Okay. So Alma, your sentence is great. Ce week-end, je vais faire du shopping avec mes amis. Très bien. Félix, je vais à l'église ce week-end. Très bien aussi, super. Et Chiara, on finit avec toi. Tu vas faire quoi ce week-end?
Ce week-end, je vais danser et cuisiner.
Danser et cuisiner. Très bien, ok. Super. Tu vas cuisiner quoi?
Cake.
Un gâteau. Ok. A cake is un gâteau in general. Ok.
Un gâteau.
Super. Ok. Très bien. Ok. Does anybody have a question about the futur proche? Or does it seem clear to you in some ways? Everything clear? Okay. Anyway, if you have any question about the expression of the future with the futur proche, this is something that we are going to talk about next week, as always, because we always do those kind of reviews so that it doesn't get lost. Does anybody have a questions about, well, anything in the class so far? So if, for example, the prepositions, well, the conjugation of the third group, vocabulary about the transports, anything?
J'ai juste une petite question sur le verbe porter.
Mhm.
Quelle est la différence entre porter et apporter?
What do you mean? C'est quoi porter, porter?
Porter et apporter.
Ah, porter et apporter. So for example, porter, it would be either to talk about, well, the clothes that you are wearing or something that you are carrying. Apporter is bringing, okay?
Ok.
So,
Donc c'est quelque chose. On apporte quelque chose.
par exemple, yeah. on dirait j'apporte du vin, par exemple.
D'accord. Ok. Merci beaucoup.
De rien, Bella. Des questions, Alma? Des questions, Chiara?
Non, très bien.
Alors, Félix, tu m'envoies un message. Practice partner needed, please. What do you mean by that? Do you want to practice your French with someone? Okay. Well, you can just like so you're directly messaging me, so you can always ask the group, okay? Sure. So if you want now or maybe later, you can reach out by email and we'll try to set that up, okay? Donc, pas de questions, Alma, pas de questions, Chiara?
Non.
No questions? Okay. Bah, très bien. Alors, on finit pas trop en retard, so we're not that late. It's only about 2 minutes. Donc, j'espère que vous avez aimé le cours d'aujourd'hui. Okay. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about in detail about the notion of vacances et voyage. Okay. So keep in mind that what we did today, for example, with the expressions of the future, the prepositions here, this is always going to be used in later classes, okay? Especially the expressions of the future, as it is going to be very important when we talk about, well, projects of vacations and holidays, okay?
Oui.
All right. Well, merci beaucoup d'être venu, okay? Merci beaucoup. I know that this lesson was kind of different since many were absent today. So normally on Thursday, we should be back at about 10 persons per class. So that will be a little bit easier to kind of share the time of expressions and talking so that it doesn't rely solely on, for example, Alma, Bella, and Kiara. Okay, so I hope that you liked today's class. If you have any questions until Thursday, you can reach out by mail. As always, so Alma, if you have seen on the chat at the start of the class, I've sent the link for the Google Drive.
Yeah.
So I'll put the presentations and the recording of the classes. So this is going to be helpful if you're not present for a certain class.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Eh ben, merci beaucoup d'être venu en tout cas. Du coup, on se voit jeudi. So we'll see each other on Thursday. Again, if you have any question, you can ask by email. All right. Merci beaucoup. Passez une bonne journée et on se voit jeudi.
Bonne journée. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Merci, au revoir.
Bonne journée. Passe une bonne journée, Alma. Passe une bonne journée, Félix.
Au revoir.
On se voit jeudi.